Well, I am personally very relieved because we have a full panel here today, and we have some very knowledgeable and experienced people to tell us about the finding more water and the status of water today. Our first speaker will be James Hawkins from Heal the Ocean. I think there's a plant in the audience. James Hawkins is a policy analyst for the Santa Barbara-based Heal the Ocean, where he has been working on local and regional water sustainability issues since 2012. Through his work, he has helped with several studies and initiatives aimed at expanding water recycling opportunities on the Santa Barbara South Coast. He has been especially focused on the prospect of implementing potable reuse projects to provide a locally controlled and drought-resilient supply of water for our region. James grew up in Santa Barbara and is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara, where he received a BA in Environmental Studies and Political Science. He is also a member of the City of Santa Barbara Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Program Citizen Advisory Committee, where he has advised on the city's water quality and restoration efforts since 2014. I heard James speak at a sustainability summit at UCSB and was impressed, and that's why he's here today.
Thank you. Close as you're comfortable. Always have this problem when I'm going to do public speaking. Thank you, Lindsay, for that very warm introduction and your great work in putting this event together. And thank you to the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara for hosting this discussion on finding more water for our communities. These are exactly the kind of forums I believe we need to move the ball forward on the water debate. And my hope is that even if we get strong El Nino rains this year, citizens will stay engaged in this conversation so that we're prepared when the next drought hits. Heal the Ocean has been working for many years on water recycling opportunities in our region, and we were very excited that the 4 major South Coast water agencies, some of which are represented here today, or many of them are undertaking or have completed studies on potable reuse. We will be hearing more about these projects from the rest of the panelists, so I'd like, instead of focusing on the individual projects, focus my presentation on the broad aspects of potable reuse and some of the potential benefits. But before we get into potable reuse, I'd like to set the stage for the discussion today by briefly covering the water supply situation both statewide and locally. Of course, with a statewide water conservation mandate in place, everyone understands that this is a very severe drought, if not the worst in living memory. Everyone is experiencing cutbacks due to the water scarcity. For instance, the State Water Project, which operates as the backbone of the state's extensive water system by transporting water from a network of reservoirs in the wetter north to the drier south and central valley, has experienced significant reductions in the water it delivers to its users. In fact, for the first time in over 50 years of the State Water Project's history, the state declared that water allocations from the project in 2014 would be 0% of contractually promised supplies. While in fairness, this allocation was eventually revised up to 5%, the severity of these cutbacks for the last several years shows how serious this drought has been for California. And the water supply situation has been just as serious locally. Lake Cachuma Reservoir, which is the primary source of water for much of the county, stood at just 14.7% capacity as of yesterday. And unfortunately, with climate change ahead, we are likely set for even more significant periods of water scarcity. In fact, just this year, researchers concluded that anthropogenic or human-caused climate change has caused the current drought to be 15 to 20% more intense than it otherwise would be. It is clear that we need to do far more to tackle climate change. However, even under the most optimistic emissions reduction scenarios, the impacts of climate change are still going to get worse. In other words, no matter what, we have to prepare for a warmer world. Now, I don't want to overstate the gloom and doom here. My point is not that we are going to run out of water next week. Instead, what I'd like everyone in this room to understand is that there are considerable limits on available water in this state. We cannot simply wish away our problems or pray for rain at the onset of every new drought. The only way we will continue to thrive in the face of this scarcity is by being proactive in water planning. So where do we go from here? Well, we have two options in the face of water scarcity: supply management and demand management. We can increase the supply of water available through water projects, and we can reduce overall water use. Now, this is easier said than done, but we have been extremely successful with our demand management programs in the face of this drought. For instance, in response to shortfalls in supplies and the governor's mandatory conservation regulations, between August 2014 and July 2015, Santa Barbara County South Coast water customers saved over 3.2 billion gallons, that's billion with a B, compared to the same period in 2013. That is a 33% drop in water use between those two periods. This is a huge success, and water purveyors and customers deserve enormous credit for their efforts. And we should continue to push the envelope on water conservation. But, and I want to be very clear on this next point, water conservation cannot be our sole response to this drought or the next one. We must also bolster supplies. And there are ways we can do this. There are many ways we can do this, but in my opinion, the most promising way to accomplish this goal is through advanced water recycling in the form of potable reuse. So what exactly is potable reuse? Well, there are many definitions, but the following will work well for our purposes today. Potable reuse encompasses all water reuse systems in which wastewater undergoes advanced treatment to produce a source of highly treated, purified water for ultimate use as a source of drinking water. And there are two types of potable reuse systems: indirect potable reuse, referred to as IPR, and direct potable reuse, referred to as DPR. Indirect potable reuse sends wastewater through highly advanced treatment processes to produce a purified water resource that is used to recharge groundwater aquifers, known as an environmental buffer. Following a 2-month minimum retention time, water is extracted from the environmental buffer and then sent to a municipal drinking water plant for further treatment and distribution to customers. On the other hand, direct potable reuse, as the name implies, aims to achieve a more direct use of purified water in a municipal drinking water system. While DPR is not yet regulated in California, any future DPR project will likely achieve the goal of more direct use of purified water by bypassing the environmental buffer with an engineered storage buffer, with the aim of achieving a shorter retention time before purified water is used in a municipal drinking water system. I'll have more on this later, but it's important to emphasize again that DPR is not yet regulated in California and is currently being investigated by an expert panel commissioned by the state. And one more important aspect to note: as you can see from these diagrams, purified water from a DPR or IPR project will never reach your tap before some interim stage of storage, whether that is an environmental buffer or an engineered storage buffer. These buffers allow project operators to effectively monitor and test to ensure that all harmful constituents have been removed before purified water is sent to a municipal drinking water system. Okay. We've gotten through defining everything, which is the difficult stuff, so thanks for bearing with me, everyone. In the first stage, microfiltration removes bacteria and larger particles utilizing membranes with pores that are approximately 0.2 micrometers thick, or 300 times finer than a human hair. Next, in the second and most critical stage of the process, reverse osmosis, which I'm sure actually many of you have at your home tap, reverse osmosis removes at least 99% of viruses and a significant percentage of contaminants of emerging concern. This is the same technology being used to turn salt water into fresh water at desal facilities all over the world. Oh, excuse me. With reverse osmosis, you are pushing water at very high pressures through semi-permeable membranes with pores that are less than 0.0001 micrometers thick, which is itself 2,000 times smaller than microfiltration in the first process. Next, and finally, ultraviolet light disinfection, which is now being used in place of chlorine at many wastewater facilities across the country, acts as a final barrier against pathogens that may escape MF or RO treatment. Furthermore, UV technology is combined with hydrogen peroxide to produce an advanced oxidation process that ensures the effective destruction of more resistant contaminants of emerging concern. Following the three-stage multi-barrier treatment process, state regulations allow this purified water to be used to recharge groundwater and then extracted after a minimum 2-month retention time for use in a municipal drinking water system. These advanced treatment processes have been successfully demonstrated as producing a safe source of water through numerous studies at facilities all over the world. These technologies can transform a wasted resource into a high-quality, purified supply of water. Now, I understand that at this point, some of you may be skeptical of how reliably we can turn wastewater into a safe source of water. I'm sure all of your lives you've been told we just want to get wastewater out of the house and, disposed of as quickly as possible. I get that skepticism, but I ask that you consider a few additional points. 1, in 2012, the highly respected National Research Council did a study on recycled water to answer the question of whether potable reuse is safe. After an extensive review of the data on chemical and pathogen occurrence in water, the NRC found that potable reuse projects do not pose any additional health risk due to chemicals and may pose orders of magnitude less risk from pathogens compared to traditional water supplies. 2, potable reuse has been successfully demonstrated as safe in facilities from California, including Orange County, to Singapore for many years. 3, these technologies are far more advanced than anything used in conventional drinking water treatment. And 4, finally, these projects consistently meet federal and state drinking water standards. So potable reuse has been shown to be safe, but is it cost effective? Is this a worthy investment for our communities? In considering water supply costs, I want to say up front that getting relevant cost information is not easy. These costs are highly variable and site-specific, which is why we do feasibility studies to determine the costs of individual projects. But for the purposes of this higher-level discussion, data from the Water Reuse Foundation and the San Diego-based Equinox Center gives us an idea of the cost of water supply alternatives on a per acre-foot basis and the financial logic of moving forward with potable reuse. A few things to consider and take away from this chart. First, conservation and efficiency are the cheapest supplies we have available. But like I've already said, we cannot rely on conservation alone. Second, potable reuse projects are cost competitive with imported water and groundwater. Third, potable reuse projects can be cheaper than conventional recycled water used for landscape irrigation because of the sometimes significant expense of installing a separate purple pipe distribution system for non-potable reuse projects. And finally, 4, potable reuse projects have been found to be less expensive than ocean desalination. Now, this data is all based on unsubsidized figures. This chart does not factor in the substantial amount of public funding available for potable reuse. For instance, the Orange County Water District in its groundbreaking IPR project was able to leverage grants to substantially reduce costs from $850 per acre foot to $478 per acre foot, which is a fairly significant reduction in cost for them. And today, the successful passage of the Proposition 1 water bond has opened up $625 million in funding for recycled water projects, with IPR and DPR at the top of the state's list for priority for funding. Prop 1 is now awarding grants for 35% of construction and implementation costs, up to a total of $15 million per project. The state is providing low-interest loans with 1% financing for any remaining costs not covered by grants, and facilities planning grants for 50% of these study costs, up to $75,000. So potable reuse is safe and affordable, but how environmentally friendly is it? How is potable reuse a sustainable water supply alternative? Well, the energy footprint of water in California is a critical consideration because it accounts for 19% of the state's total energy use, 19%. And while we will need to increase supplies in the future, there are more and less energy-intensive ways to accomplish that goal. According to the data compiled by the Pacific Institute, which is a highly respected think tank on water issues, potable reuse is a significantly less energy-intensive water supply compared to imported water, and it is up to 4 times less energy-intensive than ocean desalination. Imported water is intense from an energy standpoint because it requires a significant amount of energy to transport water across the state. While potable reuse requires some pumping, it is a far more localized use of water with far less energy costs in movement. On the other hand, treating seawater is more energy intensive than wastewater because seawater has far more salt content than wastewater, meaning it requires far less pressure and less energy to force wastewater through a reverse osmosis membrane. Finally, potable reuse projects let us embrace a broader definition of sustainability because by implementing these projects, we are transforming an otherwise wasted resource into a drought-proof and reliable water supply. We can continue dumping wastewater in the ocean, or we can use it to our benefit. So potable reuse is safe, it is cost-effective, and it is environmentally sustainable. I'm sure this sounds great in theory, but who is actually working on these projects? Well, in fact, much of California is implementing potable reuse projects. According to this map from Water Reuse, which utilizes data from the State Water Board, there are 7 potable reuse projects permitted today, which are shown in red on the map, and cities and districts across the state are working to bring over 20 more projects online, which are shown in blue and black on the map. And I'd like to very briefly just go over a couple of these projects to showcase what is possible with potable reuse. You'll remember back in the chart on costs of water supply alternatives, I cited Orange County as a model for leveraging grant funds to decrease the cost of these projects. Well, Orange County Water District's groundwater replenishment system has really led the charge on potable reuse in California and beyond. It is the largest potable reuse system in operation in the world. It is able to treat 100 million gallons a day, the equivalent of enough water for 850,000 people. Orange County uses this water to recharge its local groundwater aquifers and provide a barrier to seawater intrusion. Further to the south, the city of San Diego hopes to be the first in the state to implement a surface water augmentation potable reuse project. Once complete, this will produce 83 million gallons of water per day and will be used to recharge San Diego's San Vicente surface water reservoir. They are currently implementing a demonstration project with a significant public education component in order to show their customers that they can consistently produce a high-quality water from the forthcoming facility. All existing projects in California utilize indirect potable reuse, like we talked about earlier, which is injecting into groundwater. However, the future of potable reuse lies with DPR. Such projects are not yet permitted in California yet, but at the direction of the state legislature, the State Water Board commissioned an expert panel comprised of scientists specializing in wastewater and water to examine the feasibility of direct potable reuse. This panel is currently underway, and the report is due at the end of 2016. And there are many different hypothesized forms of direct potable reuse, but like I stated earlier in the presentation, any DPR project will aim to bypass the use of an environmental buffer in place of a more direct use of purified water. The shape of these regulations is not yet clear, but they will likely require the use of an engineered storage buffer, essentially a reservoir, to hold the purified water for sufficient time for testing and monitoring to be completed before it is introduced into a municipal drinking water system. So to wrap up, it's reasonable to ask, how much purified water can we produce on the Santa Barbara County South Coast? Well, Heal the Ocean crunched the numbers. And in 2014, South Coast cities and districts discharged a total of 12 million gallons per day of wastewater into the sea. That is 4.5 billion gallons for the entire year. At Heal the Ocean, we do not call this wastewater. We call this wasted water because it is a beneficial resource that should be reclaimed instead of discharged into the ocean. And if we were to do just that, reuse all of this currently wasted water, we can meet a substantial amount of local water supplies. Based on 2014 water data, Heal the Ocean has estimated that a third of total water demand on the South Coast can be met through maximum use of potable reuse. In the city of Santa Barbara alone, we have estimated that over half of total water demand could be met by a potable reuse project. This is not just a drop in the bucket. This is a major potential source of water that we should and can pursue. But neither Heal the Ocean or any municipal government can pursue this alone. We all have to work together to bring the promise of this water supply to our community. And it will be a substantial challenge, but I know we can do this. We can achieve water sustainability. We do not have to be held hostage to the vagaries of the weather every year, only to hope that more rain is only one winter away. We do not have to live in a society that uses a tremendous amount of energy to ship water across hundreds of miles in order to treat it, use it only once, and then treat it again before it is discharged into the ocean. I know we have the capability to forge a better path, one that is based on water security through locally controlled potable reuse projects that are safe, affordable, and environmentally sustainable. I know that a brighter water future is not beyond our reach. I know we can do this together. Thank you. And yeah, just one second. I just want to point out that we've got our white paper in the back along with the infographic right there. And please pick one up and take one home with you. There's more information in there.
Thank you so much, James. That was very informative and understandable. Next, we have Kelly Dyer. She is the water supply manager at the City of Santa Barbara. Ms. Dyer has extensive experience with strategic long-term water supply planning and feasibility study of water supply options. Prior to joining the city in 2012, Ms. Dyer worked with various water agencies throughout California and the United States for over 10 years as a consulting water resources engineer and project manager. Kelly has a professional engineering license, and she obtained a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in environmental engineering, both with specialization in water resources management. Since joining the city, Kelly has been immersed in the drought and has been responsible for projecting water supply availability, helping to secure drought supplies, implementing the city's water shortage contingency plan, and overseeing the water supply management group, including the water conservation program. Kelly Dyer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me today. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kelly Dyer with the City of Santa Barbara, and I am here to present an overview of the City of Santa Barbara's water supply. I'll start by discussing our historical and existing water supplies, our water demands and conservation, our long-term water supply plan, our current supply outlook, a summary of the desalination project that's underway, and a brief discussion of future options. Santa Barbara has a long history of water planning, and it goes way back to 1806 when a diversion structure was constructed from Mission Creek to bring water to the mission. And it has continued ever since. In the 1920s, the Gibraltar Reservoir was constructed, which is actually on the other side of the Santa Ynez Mountains, as well as Cachuma Reservoir. And this shows a comparison between what our supplies sources were in the 1980s, which was before the last major drought that this area experienced, which was in 1989. And so back in the 1980s, we had Kachuma, Gibraltar, and Mission Tunnel, and our groundwater basins, which are relatively small. And since then, we've worked really hard to diversify our water supply portfolio, and that's really the key to increasing reliability, is to have a diverse portfolio of various water supplies. So now we have added the State Water Project, strong conservation program. We have recycled water as a source, as well as desalination. This map shows where our potable water comes from, and I don't have a pointer, so hopefully I can talk through the map here. On the upper left is the Santa Ynez River, and Gibraltar Reservoir is owned by the city, and we divert water down to Cater Water Treatment Plant through Mission Tunnel. And then going further along the Santa Ynez River is Lake Kachuma. And we have our State Water Project actually comes into Lake Kachuma and is conveyed through Kachuma. Right now, the water levels are so low that we're actually pumping water out of Kachuma into Tecolote Tunnel down to Cater Water Treatment Plant. And then so you can see our truly only local water resource for potable supplies that's operational is our groundwater supplies. Everything else is on the other side of the mountains. And we're also working to reactivate our desalination facility, which will increase our local supply here in the city area. We do have a recycled water system, which was built in 1989. This shows what we call purple pipe. It's a separate distribution piping network. And this serves primarily our parks and schools. And so along the shoreline, you'll see this summer, I expect the grass will be much greener with the recycled water serving that area, whereas in the last few years it has not been. The city has a long, successful history of water conservation. We, after the last drought, experienced a 20% reduction in water use since the 80s. And the city helped to shape some of the conservation best management practices that have gone into some of the state's guidelines. And for the city, our savings have exceeded statewide and regional averages for water usage. This is a really interesting chart. It shows our water production historically, and the big dip, the big decline where the red arrow is, was during the last drought. So our water use went down by almost half in the last drought, and then after the drought ended, gradually increased, but it never went back to what it was before the drought. We had about a 20% reduction since before the drought because people implemented permanent changes in their behavior and their water usage. So here we are in our current drought. You see the next big dip down in water usage, and we've actually almost approached the point where we were in the last drought in terms of our total water usage. So it's very impressive. The city does have a long-term water supply plan that was adopted in 2011, and that has been the document that has really guided our water resources management decisions during this drought. And the plan really enforced strong conservation efforts, and our projected water use over time is expected to continue to go down despite increases in population. The plan was based on the worst drought in history, recorded history, and that was in 1947 to 52. It turns out that's now the second worst drought. The drought we're in currently is much drier. We are seeing fewer inflows to our reservoirs than we did in the historic 1947 to 52 period. The plan does outline steps we would take when we're in a water shortage, and there are 3 stages of drought. We're currently in stage 3, which is the highest level of drought emergency, and we have implemented drought water rates. We've implemented regulations on how water can be used, and we've really ramped up and increased our public outreach. And the community has responded. We've seen a dramatic decrease in our water use, which is great. And we've also started reactivation with the desalination facility. There's a lot on this chart. The point is, on the left-hand side was our supply plan based on that design period of 1947 to 52. And I'll just kind of walk through the colors. At the bottom is our recycled water. The dark and medium blue is Kachuma supplies. The light blue is Gibraltar. The green is imported water, and the yellow is groundwater. So normally in droughts, our surface water decreases, and we increase use of alternative drought supplies. Our groundwater really is, we plan to use only in droughts and emergencies and let the basins recover in normal to wet periods. And then we purchase water from supplemental water purchases that are delivered through the State Water Project. Well, all this sort of changed in the current drought, and we had to really adapt our supply plan to the current conditions, which have been much drier than what we were planning. And so you can see our Kachuma supplies is dramatically less. The dark and the medium blues has been much less in terms of availability in this drought. And so we've had to increase our purchased water. The orange bar is water that we've purchased from other agencies, some of the water purchases have been from Northern California, from rice farmers, and also from south of the Delta, closer to the east of where we live, where they had water that they were willing to sell us and deliver through the State Water Project. So the current supply outlook, we're currently in year 5 of the drought, and our supply mix this year will include the purple bars, recycled water. Our Kachuma supplies, the medium blue color, is really just carryover from previous years. As James mentioned, the allocations for Kachuma were 0 this year, and so anything that's available in Kachuma was from conservation from previous years. That was where we were able to hold on to that water and carry it over. We'll be increasing our groundwater supplies and also have secured water purchases for this year. At the end of the spring, once we have a better idea of precipitation, we'll be reevaluating our water conservation goals. Right now, our target is 25%. The community has been exceeding that. But if you look ahead to year 6, we are projecting a water shortage. The red bar, we're going to have to assess how we handle that, whether it's additional conservation, water purchases, or expanding the desal plant are all under consideration right now. So here's a summary of the desal project. It's being designed and constructed by IDE Americas. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of IDE Technologies. They have extensive experience and have constructed 400 desalination plants throughout the world, 40 countries, with 400 million gallons per day of total production capacity. Some of their recent projects have really ranged in various sizes. 165 million gallons per day plant in Israel, a 50 million gallon per day plant in Carlsbad, California, and then a 0.26 MGD plant in Australia. The city's plant is about 3 MGD. So the original plant was built in 1991, so a lot of the infrastructure was already in place for our intake and outfall, that's major infrastructure. The intake is 2,500 feet offshore, And it actually used to be the old outfall for El Estero wastewater treatment plant. And then it was repurposed to be the intake for the desal facility in 1991. Onshore, let's see if I can use this pointer. So here's the intake facility. And then onshore here, this is the pump station and chemical area. And then that feeds the desal plant area over here. And then we have the outfall, which is the orange line that goes out 8,720 feet offshore. And so the discharge from the desal plant, there's a brine that's produced that's actually mixed with the effluent, the treated effluent from El Estero wastewater treatment plant to reduce the salinity before it's discharged to the ocean. So this is the proposed layout. The yellow areas are where the reverse osmosis membranes, the treatment modules, would be placed. We have space for up to 10,000 acre-foot per year capacity. That's also what we're permitted for. This first phase is for 3,125 or about 3 MGD. This purple area is where the admin buildings would be, the offices. The green is water storage and chemicals, and then the blue is the post-treatment area where we actually add minerals back into the water before it's put into the distribution system. Energy usage is one of the primary drivers for the cost, why the operating costs are so expensive, but the electrical usage has come a long way since the original plant design. It's actually about 40% lower than it was in 1990, so it's still one of our more energy-intensive sources, but the technology has come a long way. The city is currently working on a subsurface intake and potable reuse study where we'll be evaluating the feasibility of various alternatives. Both the indirect potable reuse and direct potable reuse will be evaluated as options. So our next meeting is next week for the subsurface intake alternatives. And we're working right now on modeling the potable reuse options and how they would, we're studying how they would work with our groundwater basins, what the capacity would be, and some of the regulatory requirements in terms of how long it needs to stay in the ground. So the potable reuse options, we're very excited about this, but I think for Santa Barbara we have a really unique opportunity because of the vicinity of where our desal plant is, so closely located next to our wastewater treatment plant. They're right across the street from each other. And so at the wastewater treatment plant, we have our recycled water plant, which has the microfiltration technology. And then across the street is Ocean Desal, which has the reverse osmosis technology. So there is a possibility that in the future we could convert the Ocean Desal plant to a potable reuse plant. So in June, we'll have the results of that study, which once we know the feasibility of those options, we will be looking to update our long-term water supply plan. We'll be incorporating our current drought, which is now the new historic drought, and climate change, impacts of future climate change. Sedimentation in our surface water reservoirs is a big issue for us. We've lost quite a bit of capacity, really in Gibraltar, we've lost about 2/3 of the capacity due to sedimentation, and Kachuma is also subject to sedimentation. And then our anticipated environmental restrictions, the Kachuma project is owned by the Bureau of Reclamation, and they're currently in consultation with National Marine Fisheries Service on a biological opinion for the steelhead trout. So that could affect our water supplies, and we won't know the impacts of that until it's released. So as we update our long-term water supply plan and consider all these factors that could reduce our current existing supplies, we'll be looking to evaluate other options. There's many options we can evaluate, both from the supply side and the demand side. These are just some examples of things we might include, which would be to reevaluate the role of desal. Right now, it's our policy is that it's only used during droughts and emergencies, but if our normal supplies are going to be reduced, will we also need it in normal conditions? Potable reuse, regional groundwater banking programs, and advanced metering infrastructure, which would change the way our meters are read. Right now, someone comes around once a month and manually reads your meter, which then is incorporated into your water bill. Advanced metering infrastructure would be real-time data, and so you'd really be able to see, even on an hourly basis, how you are using water and if you have a leak, or really seeing how your behaviors might be influencing your overall water use. So that's my presentation today, and I'll be happy to take any questions after we're finished.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And the point of the questions at the end is this is being videotaped. It will be on the League of Women Voters website. And so in the future, you can go back and add to your notes or tell your friends that they can look at this informative forum and look that up for themselves. The meeting on the 27th is at City Hall in the council chambers from 9 to noon, and it's again it's an update on the subsurface intake, the status of the study at this time. We are so very fortunate today to have Thomas Mosby with us, General Manager of the Montecito Water District. He's in his last few days of being the General Manager, and we're very fortunate to catch him before he gets away from us. In 2007, the Montecito Water District Board of Directors named him as General Manager of the district effective December 2007. Mr. Mosby joined the district as its engineering manager in November 1, 1990, and served in that capacity for 17 years. Prior to working for the Montecito Water District, Mr. Mosby was employed by the MNS Engineers, Inc., a local engineering firm and a local water supply system company. Mr. Mosby was raised in Montecito and has lived in Montecito with his own family for the past 16 years. He has a degree of Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Hawaii and a Marine Technology degree from Santa Barbara City College.
Thank you, Lindsay, and we do appreciate this venue and the opportunity of all of us to make a presentation. Montecito Water District has taken a bit of a different approach to the drought, mainly for reasons of, you'll see shortly. Let's see. Again, we were formed in 1921. We service, as you know, Montecito, Summerlin, Toro Canyon, total service area 9,225 acres. Our current annual budget's right around $17 million, population 13,500. What did I do? Okay, here we go. Customer classifications. This is important because what you'll see is essentially Montecito is a single-family residential community. We have very little commercial, very little institutional. The majority of the customers, roughly 94%, are single family. They use nearly 73% of the water. You add in multifamily, that's roughly close to 76% of all water is used by that group. We have a very small non-potable group, and agriculture, you can see the number of accounts. It's literally less than 1%. So again, we are a single family residential community. We've been around since 21. When we look at our district supply sources, of course, Jamison Lake, which was put into service in 1930. We have Dalton Tunnel, infiltration groundwater. That's a 2.1-mile tunnel that goes through the Santa Ynez Coastal Range. Groundwater, very, very small component of our water supply. Of course, the Kachuma Project and of course, state water. So essentially, when you look at these water supplies, Montecito water is 95% reliant on surface water. That is why we had to take a bit of a different approach. We have very little groundwater, and as such, with the drought in its current stage and where it's been, we had to take some very severe actions back in 2014. When we look at a normal year supply, again, we have roughly total available 5,873 acre feet. It's an important number because it represents what we have during normal times. You can see Jamison Lake, typically 1520, Lake Kachuma, 2651, and you've seen the numbers from the other purveyors on what's happened to these supplies due to this drought. Drought impacts the water supply. Again, here's our drought monitor map for California. We'll just take a look. This was October 6, 2015. This is now current, January 12th. There's been a slight improvement, but if you notice, Santa Barbara County, the Central Valley, we're still in an exceptional drought. This is tough. It's very difficult for the South Coast. The improvements we're seeing, of course, are in the Sierras, Northern California. When we look at historical droughts, Kelly mentioned this earlier, we look at the 47 to 51 drought. That period, what I've done is shown those years. That was the critical drought, which was the planning for the Kachuma project. Look at the total rainfall for that 4-year period, 58.87 inches. Then we have the drought, the last one that we had that we thought, of course, was draconian, running out of water. That actually provided 69 inches. Look at our current drought. Beats everything, as Kelly indicated. This is now the top. 51 inches of rain. So it shows you how serious it's been to Santa Barbara County. Again, we look also at the statistics, and you see what happened in the district and its formation. 1,200 meters, the critical drought, we're currently at 4,591 meters. So you look at water supply, look at the total number of connections, you can see the challenges that we've been facing. Again, 95% surface water. Jamison Lake, because we run it off a roll curve, that's actually providing very little water compared to what it used to. We're actually reduced the actual demand by 75%. We're now down to only receiving 20% of deliveries from that facility. Lake Kachuma, this has been mentioned, 14-15 water year, 45% was what we received, 0 for the first time in the Kachuma project history. State Water Project, 5% table A in 2014. 20% table A 2015, and we're assuming, worst case scenario, no state water allocation in 2016, though currently we are at 10%. But for planning purposes, worst case. District response, for all of you that live in Montecito, you're very much aware that we're under allocations and penalties. That was adopted back in March of 2014 through Ordinance 92 and 93. No new water service connections and allocations to all community members. So water use restrictions with fines for violations, monthly customer allocations, including penalties, a moratorium on water service connections. Essentially, that's 92 and 93. Supplemental water purchases, critical, most important. The City of Santa Barbara has been very successful. Montecito has been working also with the Central Coast Water Authority. We have purchased a lot of water to get us through this drought. And in March 2015, due to the successes of conservation within the community, as well as supplemental water supply purchases, we adopted a new Ordinance 94, which actually gave essentially 24% more water to the community. So when we look at the change in water demand by customers, what I'm showing you here is 2012-13, 13-14, and 14-15. And you can see the change in water demand. Literally 6,000 acre feet, 12-13, we're at 3,339. The actual cumulative change, 45%. Phenomenal. That's what the community did. They stepped up. Conservation's been an enormous part of our plan. When you look at the actual water use, you graph it from July 12th through September 15, you can see for the summer period of June, July, August of 13, the peak in water use, you can see sales in acre feet. That's what the ordinances did. It's a phenomenal change. It's a drop, but it was very important that conservation occur in Montecito, and I'll show you why in a minute. Take a look at this slide. This is August 2013. Think of a 1 acre property and water use. Think about, we have roughly 850 of those. So again, you're looking at the average water use of 60 HCF. I know for somebody like the city or Goleta, you've got to be kidding, Tom. 60 HCF by a single family customer. That's what the average was. And if you look at those outliers, 350 HCF in 1 month, tremendous numbers, huge numbers that we had to deal with. So what do we do when we adopted the allocation and ordinances? We targeted those very high water users. What did the ordinances do? Did that. So it changed water supply demand by our customers significantly, which allowed us to deal with this drought. Still a couple outliers, but they're paying pretty significant penalties. But again, those were 1 acre properties that showed 2013 versus our 2014. You notice the demand dropped from 60 to 27 HCF. But the allocation to our customers for a 1 acre property for that same month was 38. So the community's really responded. Again, it's water supply, demand management, and this is how we've been attempting to deal with this drought. Also, supplemental purchases and the import of state water has been critical. This is an important slide, even though the state water project hasn't been reliable. Literally, we've imported all agencies, 27,000 acre feet since 2012 through September 2015. That is more than what the annual supply of Kachuma is. So again, this was a critical component for all of us. Montecito picked up a lot of water because, as you saw, our surface water supplies locally are severely diminished. Current water supply conditions, well, here we are. And everyone's talking about El Nino, so let's take a look at rainfall. The 82-83 event, the 97-98 event, normal, and that little red line is current El Nino. I have not given up. February. Of course, we set in December, January, but I'm not going to go there right now. But anyway, you can see we're still in a very serious drought in this area. It's tough. It's really challenging. You can look at the Kachuma project. Again, it was mentioned earlier. 14.7%, 28,000 acre feet left. And the interesting thing is it spilled back in April of 2011. So you can see how serious the drought has been when you looked at the different drought periods and rainfall. Our Jameson Lake, almost at the dead pool level. We've got another 6 feet to go before we hit our lowest operating valve. And then Jameson's essentially going to be out of service. So, but again, even with this drought, all the imports, the purchase of supplemental water, the managing of supplies, we still have water available. And when you look at the actual supply that we will have this coming year, for 2015, we actually produced 3,925 acre feet. For the next year, in 2016, we're at 5,928 acre feet of water. So we have a lot of water available to the community, but the dependency on surface water restorations and the State Water Project is something we're going to really need to see in 2017. So again, the water's there. We've taken the actions we needed, but of course it was also a function of our customers conserving water to the degree they did. I think we're one of the highest percentage of conservation within the state. But even with that, it's interesting to note that Montecito, 200 gallons per day per person. That's per capita use. And when you look at Goleta or you look at Santa Barbara, that's under drought conditions. I think Goleta, are you at 51? 47. Are you 40? Well, anyway, Montecito has done a... How do I compare with that? Ryan, what do I say? But same with the city. But again, Montecito has conserved significantly. We have the water supply available in 2016, and we will have water in 2017. Water supply development, we will continue to look at supplemental water purchase opportunities. Critical. It's very, very important for us. Regional use of the City of Santa Barbara desalination plant. This is the part where I'm always begging when I talk to Kelly. Please. We are working, we're negotiating with the city now. It's a tough negotiation. Desal is very expensive. And of course, a new cost of service studies need to be done. And it will significantly impact the cost of water to Montecito when you join. But you really need reliability and security. Critical for the future of Montecito. And that's pretty much my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, today we have Ryan Drake. Again, I was privileged to hear him speak at the Central Coast Sustainability Summit, and that's the reason he's here today. And we don't want to leave out our neighbors, so we have Goleta as well. Ryan Drake is the Water Supply and Conservation Manager for the Goleta Water District. In this role, Ryan is responsible for the district's water supply and demand planning, as well as administering all of the district's water supply agreements and permits. Ryan manages the new Water Services Division and the Water Resources Division, focused on conjunctive use of groundwater supplies and optimizing surface water supplies. He also is in charge of the creation and administration of the district's conservation programs. Ryan is an environmental and water rights attorney, specializing in water rights transactions, groundwater adjudications, permitting, and water transfers.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters, and thank you to my prior panelists. I'm going to, I think, talk about how, given what James, Kelly, and Tom have said, how we fit into the supply scenario, focusing particularly on groundwater, where we are now with our groundwater supplies and what the future may hold for those supplies. So some brief background on Goleta Water District. We were established in 1944. We have a 5-member elected board. We provide water to approximately 87,000 people in the Goleta Valley. Some of our largest customers are UCSB, as well as some very large agricultural operations off on the coast, off 101. We have 270 miles of pipeline, 7 active wells, which we're pumping pretty heavily right now to get through the drought, which I'll talk about in a bit. We have 8 reservoirs, and our service area is quite large. We span about 29,000 acres. So within our Goleta Water Service area, you can see our westernmost boundary is up the coast on 101 all the way up to El Capitan, spanning to the westernmost boundary of City of Santa Barbara. We also serve the City of Santa Barbara Airport. That is technically Santa Barbara service territory, but we have an account with them that we have a pass-through agreement where we provide water to the airport in exchange for some water from them. So to give you a sense of what our normal water supply source is, typically we have a functioning recycled water system. We partner with Goleta Sanitary District out at the airport. They produce the water and we distribute it. We paid for the cost of the plant. We get about 1,000 acre-feet of recycled water to serve landscape irrigation. Most of the outdoor irrigation on UCSB is on recycled water, and many of the golf courses in the region. That has not changed during the drought. We've continued to produce 1,000 acre-feet, and that's been a big help to reduce some potable sources of supply. State Water Project, normally we have about 3,800 acre-feet in an average year. That serves about 23% of our supply. Groundwater in a normal year, we haven't really relied upon as much. It's only about 14% of our supply portfolio. We want to preserve that water as a drought buffer for when we really need it, which is now, as I'll talk about. And Lake Achuma, we have a large entitlement to Lake Achuma. Typically, it's about 57% of our total supply. It's 9,322 acre-feet. And what we've seen in the drought is, as surface water has become unavailable, as my prior panelists discussed, we've had to really flip this on its head, where groundwater has really become our main source of supply. And actually, for this month, it'll be the first time in over 20 years that we are mainly producing groundwater over any other source of supply. We're almost completely reliant upon it in this month and next, which is pretty interesting. But so I mentioned we have 7 wells that are running all the time. To give you an idea of our total supply portfolio, we have 5 well projects that are planned for 2015-16. We have 2 new wells that we're proposing to put online, and we're rehabbing some older wells to increase their production capacity. And as part of that, we're also increasing the injection capacity, which I'll mention in a little bit on why that's important. State Water, as Tom mentioned, we did receive a 10% allocation for 2016. We had to go out and purchase 2,500 acre-feet of supplemental water as well. We're trying to hold off on doing that as long as we can, because eventually we'll all have to repay that within 10 years because it's a one-to-one exchange is how those work in the state water system. So we reached the point where if we didn't get that supplemental water, we were going to be heading into a stage 4 water shortage emergency, which is next to our most severe. Stage 5 is our most severe. Stage 4 would have meant banning lawns, outdoor irrigation, a lot of impacts to the community. So we decided to pull the trigger to acquire this supplemental water to avoid going there and getting us through to hopefully pass the next winter. Kachuma, as everyone mentioned, we have a 0% allocation for 15-16 for the first time in the history of the project. So typically, since that's our majority source of supply, that's a big shortfall to make up. So that's really shows why we had to rely upon groundwater to do that. To give you just some overall terminology of groundwater, kind of some big buzzwords that you might hear. Groundwater is water contained under the ground's surface that's located between sand, gravel, and rock. An aquifer is an underground geological formation of sand, soil, gravel, and rock that's able to store and yield the water, which is important. Drawdown is a phenomenon that you may see throughout the state, which is a lowering of the groundwater level caused by pumping, typically excessive pumping beyond the rate of replenishment. Recharge is water that's added to an aquifer either naturally through rain, infiltration, or artificially, where we can actually pump water back into the basin, withdraw it, pump it back, and use that as sort of a bank. The safe perennial yield is another concept that factors into that, which is the maximum quantity of water that can be withdrawn from a particular groundwater basin that doesn't exceed the rate of natural recharge. And what happens is when you tend to exceed that safe yield of the groundwater basin, that's when you start to see negative effects. You see lowering of the water table, you see some land subsidence where the land levels will actually drop, and you can even see seawater intrusion in areas near to the coast. We're lucky to have a barrier, which is called the Moore Fault, for our basin that prevents seawater intrusion from happening. But there's many other basins throughout the state that aren't as lucky. So a production well is a drilled hole to reach underground water supplies to extract water. That's what we're siting right now, 2 additional ones. Monitoring wells, we have a large network of 47 monitoring wells throughout the basin that monitor water levels constantly on a real-time basis. We also partner with the USGS Geological Survey to monitor groundwater levels within our basin. We track those, have index wells to measure, well, what are we really seeing in different portions of the basin? Are we withdrawing too much in this area? Do we need to recharge here? How can we do that? And that all factors into how we manage this vital source of supply during a drought. We have 7 treatment operators for all these wells. That's very important since when you do rely upon groundwater, you tend to see some quality issues. We have recently experienced some quality issues with iron and manganese because we've switched to completely to groundwater almost at this point. So we always working to treat those and try to fix that issue. Thank you. So how do we manage this groundwater basin? That's very important to manage it for future generations. So there is an adjudication process which is typical throughout the state, whereby all the parties who potentially own land overlying a groundwater basin get together, fight it out in court, and a court will sort out everybody that owns which amount of water right in the basin. And then you also get water agencies such as us, who aren't landowners but take water out of the basin. It's called an appropriative right. So in Goleta, we went through a very long adjudication process, started in the 1970s and ended up in about 1991 was when we finally ended up with the final judgment after it went through the Court of Appeal and everything. So the criticism of the adjudication process is it's long, it's very costly, and very difficult. So there's not a lot of basins that have actually gone through that pain. So the state, as a result of that, is currently seeking to streamline the process to make it a little bit quicker, a little bit easier, but that still hasn't totally rolled out, so we'll see whether it actually achieves its objective. Groundwater management plans are currently required in many areas of the state, so even where there hasn't been an adjudicated basin where we know what everyone's rights are, they still have some management plans to try to avoid any adverse effects to groundwater pumping in those basins, but they often are a little hindered because they don't have great data on who's pumping what and where. So the state has seen large drawdowns throughout this drought, as that first map that Tom put up showing all the red. What people have done as all the surface water has dried up is just pumped the groundwater basin like crazy because it's a last resort and that's what's available. So we're seeing major problems with drawdowns in aquifers, not just in this region, but across the state, where that's going to have to be replenished in addition to our reservoirs. So it's almost like a double hit to come out of this drought. So that's something that's going to have to be dealt with. Luckily, we don't have that problem. We've been managing our basin sustainably for the last 20 years. waters. So there's two purveyors within our basin. It's the Gallia Water District and La Cumbre Mutual Water Company, which mostly serves Hope Ranch. Our basin's divided into three sub-basins. The West Basin, which has little poor water quality and isn't fully adjudicated. It's only partially adjudicated. And then we have the North and Central Basins, which are the main portions of our larger basin, and that's where most of the higher quality water is, and that's where all of our wells are, and that we rely upon to serve our customers. The boundaries roughly coincide with fault lines and the San Ynez Mountains. And as I mentioned earlier, the faults protect the basin from saltwater intrusion, so that we're very lucky to have that. We have engineers that manage our well facility upgrades and rehabilitations, working around the clock. Our groundwater elevations, as I mentioned, are measured constantly. We have a very sophisticated basin numerical model, where we have a lot of consultants that are continuously working on our model to model pumping and climate scenarios, and that works into our overall supply portfolio of what we're looking at in terms of supply of, well, can we increase our groundwater pumping here? Can we draw it down here? What's that going to take to balance out our supply and demand? And in response to the drought, we have met the challenge of reductions and conservation in the community. As I said earlier, we're now at 47 gallons per capita per day, which is one of the lowest in the state. So our customers are to be applauded for that. We have a wide variety of conservation programs, rebate programs, and getting out in the community a lot. And it's worked quite well overall. But unfortunately, even with all that conservation, we've been forced to rely upon our groundwater to make up the differences in these large surface water supply shortfalls. So we have a groundwater management plan that is also being updated in response to the drought to make sure we have the best information. I mentioned the adjudication. It's called the right judgment. A lot of people may have heard of that in the area. As I said, that went from 1973 to 1989. We got the final Court of Appeal decision 1991. So you can see the amount of work that goes into that process and all the generations of attorneys that are involved and make a great killing on these groundwater adjudications. But it did determine the safe yield of the basin for us. So what that did was quantified our groundwater right that said you can only take up to this amount per year to make sure that the basin doesn't get overdrawn. In addition to that, we've built up a drought buffer, which I'll talk about, that's been really important to us. What happened was when we were thinking about joining the State Water Project in the early 90s, the citizens of Goleta passed an ordinance called the Safe Water Supplies Ordinance and said, okay, we're worried about kind of the growth inducement of state water, where that's going to really grow our community, and all of a sudden we're going to be out of control with our growth. So as partly to check that, they introduced the Safe Water Supplies Ordinance. And what that did was it guides our policy during drought and during normal years in numerous ways. So it demanded for us to create a drought buffer. And what that means is for every 1/3 of acre feet that we give to new development at all, we have to put 2/3 of that back into the groundwater basin and store that up. And what that meant was, since we've been doing it over the years, we've had about 50,000 acre feet of water in storage in our basin, which is our typical demands district-wide are about 14,000. So it's a pretty hefty buffer in the worst-case scenario, which is now. Unfortunately, we've been using it. We have an annual storage commitment as part of that. And regarding new water allocations, it said Gallia Water District cannot issue new meters or new water allocations unless 4 conditions are met. Number 1, you're getting 100% of Kachuma supplies. Number 2, your groundwater levels are at full basin levels. And the others are not quite as important for purposes here, but you can see from the prior presentations, it's going to be a long time before we've got 100% of our Kachuma and before we have a normal groundwater basin since we've been pumping. So since October 14, our district hasn't issued any new meters or any new water allocations. The only projects that have gotten any new meters in had already purchased a water allocation or have a right to build under an agreement with us. Most of them were entered into the 80s. So I covered those points, but looking at our management of groundwater and statewide and in terms of our district, what's the future of managing groundwater as to continue to ensure that this is a vital backup source of supply when you're lucky enough to have it. Sorry, Tom and Montecito, unfortunately, don't have it. Injection is key. It helps enhance the natural recharge by injecting drinking water or raw Kachuma water through wells back into the ground. So if we just let our basin recover without some help, at the level we've been pumping, it's going to take years. So we don't want that to happen in case the drought does end and another one hits, or this one continues. So we're really investing a lot of money into looking at injection capacity for when we do have surface water to put that back into the ground when we absolutely don't need it. Part of that, we have an ASR program, Aquifer Storage and Recovery, which is a dual purpose well that can extract and inject water. So that way we have a lot of flexibility where if we do need to extract, we can do that on a dime. If we do need to inject, we can do that on a dime as well. So conjunctive use is how we've been managing the basin. It's surplus surface water injected into the ground during wet years or even normal years. But during dry drought periods, we'll have to pump that groundwater. Before the drought, we injected about 7,000 acre-feet of water into the basin over a couple years. So now that the drought is hopefully easing up a tad, or if it does, that's something we'll be looking at doing. If not, unfortunately, we'll have to continue to increase our production. Another thing is related to what James and Heal the Ocean were talking about, IPR and DPR. We're looking at the highest level of treated wastewater for storage in the basin, because if we have to inject, what if we could rely upon another source of water rather than costly imported water or wastewater? So if we could treat that wastewater to the highest level through potable reuse, that could be an alternative source of supply available to us. We could also reduce outfall to the ocean from the plant at Gallia Sanitary District, and we think that would have a lot of beneficial impacts to the environment. We're doing a pilot study right now, and we are commissioned a feasibility study to look at whether direct potable reuse or indirect potable reuse would be the best use of that water. So we want to do a pilot project to demonstrate the safety of that water before we go forward with any larger project. So determine the feasibility, the cost, and then scale those costs up is the idea. Another thing we're looking at in terms of groundwater is protecting those supplies, neutralizing any threats to our groundwater supply, including any attempts to export the water out of the basin and market that. Water quality threats from any oil activity off of the coast or within our district, looking at whether fracking ever occurs, anything like that. So we're highly cognizant of that and test our groundwater quality on a daily basis to ensure that backup source of supply is protected. And then stormwater is something that's kind of become the new hot button issue in the water world of, well, let's look at stormwater capture. All this water gets wasted out to the ocean in heavy storm events. Is there something we can look at with infrastructure to change that, to capture that water? We could have recharge basins where we could let that water infiltrate our basin more slowly rather than have it just run off to the ocean. So that's another thing we've engaged a couple studies on to see how we move forward with that to increase our stormwater capture. So taken together, there's a lot of opportunities, including potable reuse, to further augment our supplies locally rather than looking at imported supplies. And we could do a lot of these projects with potentially lower energy costs. So that's very promising for the community. But in the meantime, I think people need to continue to conserve, do their part, which they are, and we'll all hope that we can manage out of this drought soon. So happy to answer any questions on that, and thank you for everyone for joining us today.
We have 2 roving mics. So if you raise your hand, someone will come to you with a mic, and you can ask your questions.
This, I guess, is a question for James. I'm just trying to understand the concept of treating half of our water to potable standards rather than, well, as I understand it, something like 3% of our total water demand or less is used for potable purposes, used for human consumption. Most of it's used for landscape and cleaning and a whole variety of other things. We have a system to deliver reclaimed water to our biggest users already. So I'm wondering why we would abandon that and go to a system of tertiary treatment of so much water when really we only have to deliver a little bit of potable water to residences, which might be done through reverse osmosis, as you talked about, already exists in some places and the like. It just seems like an awful lot of treatment for the purposes we're looking at.
Okay, hold on. I think that's a very fair question, and I think a lot of people are understandably and reasonably pushing for more gray water use and rainwater capture on their property. I think the simple answer to the question is, with the drought, I think there's been much less of an emphasis on outdoor irrigation and having people cut back on outdoor irrigation. And potable water is the highest use of water. And, if we're looking at a scenario where our surface water supplies are less and less reliable, which would normally be providing our potable water supplies, we need something that's supplemental to that. And potable reuse, in my opinion, offers a good supplement to that. There's desal. Obviously, the agencies are using more groundwater for that purpose. But I think in the context of climate change, we really need to be taking a serious look at potable reuse and implementing it in our communities. I hope that answers it generally. I'm happy to talk more about it after.
Hello?
Over here?
I'm not sure if this is on. My question was for James. James, you talked about the environmental impact of DPR, and particularly from an energy standpoint. So I was just curious again about the byproducts and the environmental impact of that.
So this is what we call the brine concentrate, because reverse osmosis operates from a concept of physical separation. So the same way with desal, when you treat ocean water, you've got a salt, concentrate byproduct. With wastewater, you've got a brine concentrate with, all the chemicals that would normally be in wastewater. From Heal the Ocean's perspective, ultimately we want zero discharge because we don't want any of these contaminants going in the ocean. Now, I will be honest, this is, I think, the most difficult issue facing potable reuse is what do we do with this brine concentrate? And there's a lot of different ideas about disposal concepts, but I think generally the benefit of potable reuse is that we're creating a volume of concentrate that's a lot smaller than what we normally discharge in the ocean with wastewater, which gives us more opportunities for either supplemental treatment on that water or discharge, via landfill or something like that. There's a lot of smart people working on this, so I think it's going to be an issue that evolves over the years, but I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes and definitely researching it closely.
We have a question there.
I was very pleased that the gentleman from Goleta finally mentioned stormwater capture. That was something I expected earlier on, I guess, but what are the impediments to doing that, and what is Santa Barbara doing along those lines?
Is this on? Hi. Santa Barbara, a lot of the primary benefits for stormwater capture have been for water quality issues. We are going to be evaluating the water supply benefits of stormwater. That's something that is now required by the state in order to receive grant funding, and it's also something we would roll into our long-term water supply plan update. One of the challenges we have are the characteristics of our groundwater basins in the downtown area. There's very low permeability layer, and so anything that's recharged on the surface in the downtown area doesn't necessarily make it to our groundwater supply, which is in the deeper producing zones. It will help with the habitat, and then it kind of just goes out to the ocean if it's in the shallow zone. So a lot of the natural recharge that's into our basins is in the creeks and up in the foothill areas where we are getting a natural recharge in the creeks already into the groundwater basins.
What further can you do?
Are you asking for different concepts for stormwater capture? So many agencies will capture stormwater and put it into very large spreading basins. That's probably the most cost-effective way. One of the challenges with stormwater is sometimes you really need storage in order to be able to use it when you need it. So it comes in the winter months. You don't really need to irrigate your landscaping in the winter months when it's raining. When you need that water is in the summer months. And so in order to really make use of that stormwater, you need a storage. So the if you have a groundwater basin where you have space for spreading basins to help with that recharge of your groundwater basins, that's pretty cost effective for some agencies. We've looked at rain barrels on properties, but have found that it really wasn't cost effective because the water wasn't available when you needed it in the summertime.
I have a question about wells and drilling wells. I know in Carpinteria there's a big, I assume there was a big controversy over just saying, well, to hell with you, I'm going to drill my own well. And people do. And I don't know if they're tracked or how they determine how much water they're taking out. And is that the same in your jurisdictions? Is it a statewide issue? Because if people, once again, it'll be the have and the have-nots. I have money, I can drill a well, screw you. So, this doesn't sound fair to me. What else is new?
I can answer that one. At least for Goleta, we were lucky enough to have that groundwater adjudication, like I said, where we have generally an idea of everyone who has a well because they had to come in and get their rights quantified. But if you're a landowner, regardless of whether it's an adjudication or not, you do have a right to site a well on your property and to pump that water. And it is, I think, a lack of monitoring throughout the state that's kind of hindered efforts to see how many wells are there. We know when they're drilled, there's records of them. The county is the permitting agency for the most part, but it's hard to track all those wells throughout the basin, how much they're pumping. Mostly the water districts don't have the authority to do that.
It's everybody's water.
It is. It's the classic tragedy of the commons where, and the way that's worked out is as soon as you start impacting your neighbor and you're saying you're drying up my well, that's when you have a recourse. But otherwise, there's no general preservation for the best unless someone is the agency managing that supply.
I can speak on behalf of on behalf of the city. We have a little bit different authority because we're a city than water districts. And so going into the drought, we did implement a new ordinance that if you're within a certain distance from the water system, you can't drill a new well. And that was to try to prevent the overuse of the basin during the drought.
Go ahead.
Okay. This is for Ryan Drake. And, sorry. And I have a question about the person who tried to serve water to people in Montecito privately from his ranch. Excuse me. Excuse me. And I know your newsletter that came out yesterday, very timely, mentioned this. My question is, have you succeeded in stopping him from actually exporting that water? Did you get an injunction or something to do that?
Yeah, so far we haven't observed any new exports off the ranch since we initially kind of stepped up and challenged them on that. What that boils down to is they're a private landowner and they claim we own the water below our ranch. Our hydrogeologist looked at it and said, well, this affects your basin that the citizens of Goleta rely upon. So to the extent you're proposing to export massive amounts of water out of the region to other communities, that would impact the supply available to Goleta. So they disagree and said they're not connected, and that's what we're fighting over right now is the level of connectivity between our scientists and it'll be their scientists, and they'll have to get sorted out. But that is under litigation right now, and that's ongoing.
And they're stopped from exporting while the litigation
In the
is
meantime,
going
we
on.
haven't observed any exportations.
I have two things. One, do they still use salt to clear the snowy roads in the east? Could we sell salt to them? And the second one is, I don't understand why if water was allocated for hookups for building in the 1880s in view of an unexpected drought, why that couldn't be rescinded. I don't understand all the building I see going on. Where's the water going to come from?
Sure. Yeah, and those agreements all entitled those property owners to an entitlement. They've paid for that. So at that point, it becomes an entitlement. If we were to take that away, we'd likely be open to a legal challenge that you're taking my water away. It'd really effectively be no different from us going to an individual homeowner and saying, well, you now no longer have a water hookup. I mean, at the point that they pay for that water and paid for the capacity in our system, and we've been planning for that capacity in our system to come online, to then shut it down is challenging. It likely could be done under certain scenarios, but we'd likely to get challenged in a legal action if we were to do that. But given that, with all the projects that do come online, we ask them to look at recycled water for all their outdoor irrigation to reduce any potential demands. We put in green building standards. So all of those things help reduce the water use that they will use. And for the most part, their actual planned projects will use far less water than the use on the property before, since many of them were agricultural properties or industrial properties that used large industrial processes. So in many instances, it actually reduces the amount of water on that parcel, but it is a bad public perception issue in that how can all this building be occurring when you say you're not issuing new meters? And it is old projects that got their allocation and are now coming online.
I have a question. I've heard discussion and explanations about why we can't take the silt out of Gibraltar, but is it a possibility to take the silt out of Cachuma? Because there is silting in Cachuma, there's more of a spread of the water, which leads to more evaporation. And with the low level of water at this time, is it possible to take out some of the silt?
I believe the county looked at that in a recent study, and it was cost prohibitive for Cachuma as well. Just the sheer amount of soil you have to remove and where do you put it is a big challenge. At one point, we had an idea to put it at the beaches, which is where the dams are really stealing the sedimentation from. But being able to transport it and get it there was cost prohibitive.
I have a question about the situation in Santa Barbara. Your bar graph with the red at the top was very alarming, and I'd like to know what kind of plans there are for this year and 2017 if we don't get the real promise of El Nino.
So this spring, we're going to be assessing our water supply situation and considering options to meet that gap for next year. We could increase our conservation target if we went to 35%. We know that's very achievable because the community's already been saving by 35% cumulative. And that really helps to close quite a bit of that gap in the following year. And we're also looking at securing additional water purchases as contingency. So that's something we're working on this spring, where we'd be buying water this year that would actually be delivered and used for next year. And then at the same time, we're also looking at the cost of expanding the desal plant, although that wouldn't help for that year 7. That's really for year 8, 2 years out, when that supply would become available.
Thank you. I have another question. This one's for Kelly. I know that the city is doing the potable reuse study, but I was wondering whether potable reuse water was going to be injected into the groundwater basin near to Montecito to prevent that seawater intrusion, and whether you saw that happening sooner than later.
That's one of the options that's being considered. So we're looking both at the indirect potable reuse and direct potable. And the indirect options involve injection wells where we'd inject the advanced treated water into the ground. And there's various locations. We're looking both at, Foothill Basin and then also along the coast as a seawater intrusion barrier. And then once it's injected into the ground, then we'd have to pump it back up. And particularly in downtown Basin, it would need additional treatment beyond that. So that all that additional infrastructure, we would need additional wells to achieve the capacity we'd be looking for, and that would add a lot to the costs. And so if we can do direct potable reuse, we save a lot on that well and treatment infrastructure.
I'd just like to have anyone tell me, when you purchase water, probably from North County, how does it come to you? Does it go into Kachuma and add to Kachuma?
So typically, it's transmitted through the State Water Project system. So most of it is held up in San Luis Reservoir. That's kind of the big intersection of the State Water Project where a lot of water can be made available. We collectively all manage our supplies differently, but if it's in San Luis, we can choose to either bring it down to Lake Kachuma and use Lake Kachuma as a conveyance facility to bring it to our customers, or we can choose to leave it in San Luis and store that water up north for when we want to bring it down, or if we want to send it somewhere else. So it does give that flexibility for the water agencies to be able to keep their water up in San Luis Reservoir.
Are there any further questions? Well, yes, we have one more.
Hi, I live in Summerlin, and we have a great wastewater retreatment plant, but we're not using it as far as recycling our water in town. And the whole downtown business district has been redone in the last 5 years. There's lots of planting there now, excuse me, and all the purple pipes are in, but it's not being used. And so I'd like to know why this is a problem that should be rectified, I think.
Montecito has actually looked at the Summerlin wastewater treatment plant. One of the issues they have at Summerlin is water quality. It's very high TDS water. Plus it has a high level of boron, which is not good for plants. So in order to actually have that utilized as a water source, we'd have to do some very, very extreme treatment, which would probably be RO. And the cost of that were pretty extreme at this point, and we're right now trying to manage just the drought as we are. It would be such a limited amount of water that could be utilized by the downtown area that it didn't make sense to focus that type of an expenditure on such a limited use, when in essence the funds used could be for the purchase of supplemental water. So that's why the Summerlin facility has not yet been developed.
It looks like we're coming to a conclusion, and thank you for all this tremendous information. I have one brief